We've talked about what gender is and how it affects people's lives, but we skip a part on the most fundamental of all issues of gender. Why does gender matters a lot to us? Just by looking at gender, our understanding of this topic would not be completed without knowing the word feminism. In the field of literary criticism, feminism is a theory that deals with gender equality. Other than that, feminism also supports social equality among different genders, whether you are a male, a female, a lesbian, or a gay. But as years go by, different literary theories arise that deals with gender, and one of these is the queer theory.
To begin with my discussion, queer theory as an academic tool came from gender and sexuality studies, and it was only established during 1990s. This theory contests many of the set ideas of more established fields it came from, by challenging the notion of defined and finite identity categories as well as the norms that create a binary of good versus bad sexualities. The different examples of binary in queer theory are masculine, feminine, boys, girls, lesbian, gays. This theory also argues that there is no set normal but only changing norms that people may or may not fit into, making queer theory's main challenge to disrupt binaries in the hopes that this will destroy differences as well as inequality. You might be wondering who are the people behind this theory. The term queer theory itself came from Teresa de Lauretis, who worked on the feminist cultural studies journal Differences. She explains her term to signify that there are at least three interrelated projects at play within this theory. She refuses heterosexuality as the benchmark for sexual formations, a challenge to the belief that lesbian and gay studies is one single entity, and a strong focus on the multiple ways that race shapes sexual bias. Doloritis proposes that queer theory could represent all of these critics together and make it possible to rethink everything about sexuality. Aside from this woman, there are also other core theorists who work on this project, and they are Michael Foucault, Gail Rubin, Eve Kosofsky, and the last one is Judith Butler. Michael Foucault argued that sexuality was a discursive production rather than an essential part of a human, which came from his larger idea of power not being repressive and negative as productive and generative. Gail Rubin, on the other hand, the author of Thinking Sex, states that biological explanations of sexuality by thinking about the way that sexual identities as well as behaviors are hierarchically organized through systems of sexual classifications. Another paragon in this field, named Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick, the master of epistemology of the closet, she argues that the homo-hetero difference in the modern sexual definition is vitally disjointed for two reasons. Homosexuality is thought to be part of a minority group, and how homosexuality is gendered to be either masculine or feminine. She points out that the definition of sexuality depends a lot on the gender of the romantic partner one makes, making the assumption that the gender one has and the gender of the person one is attracted to make up the most important element of sexuality. The last theorist is Judith Butler. She deliberately states in her book Gender Trouble that gender-like sexuality is not an essential truth obtained from one's body, but something that is acted out and portrayed as reality. In using the queer theory as your technique in literary criticism, there are a few key concepts that you need to familiarize yourself with. The first term is sex. Sex is mistakenly identified as gender most of the time, but sex differentiates persons' biological orientation and it also appeals to the anatomy of an individual reproductive system. On the other hand, gender is a term that refers to social or cultural distinctions associated with being male or female. A person's sex as determined by his or her biology does not always correspond with the gender. Gender is not determined on the biological orientation that a person has, but it corresponds on the behavior and the role that he or she is fulfilling in a certain society. The last term is sexuality. Sexuality is the way people experience and express themselves sexually. This involves biological, erotic, physical, emotional, social, or spiritual feeling and behaviors. The following are just a few examples of sexuality. First is the transgender, gay, lesbian, bisexuality, pansexuality, asexuality, and intersex. Now, let's move on the application of this literary theory in literary criticism. Of course, the main objective of this discussion is to let you know how to use queer theory in the field of literature. These are the typical questions that can be used as your guidelines in the application of this theory. First, you need to answer what are the elements of the text can be perceived as being masculine or feminine, and how do the characters support these traditional roles. Next is that what sort of support is given to elements or characters who question the masculine, feminine binary. What happens to those elements or characters? After answering the question, you need to answer this follow-up question, which is what elements in the text exist in the middle between the perceived masculine and feminine binary. In other words, what elements exhibit traits of both bisexual? The next thing to do is to question the motive of the author. How does the author present the text? Is it traditional, narrative? Is it secure or forceful? Or it is more hesitant or even collaborative? After knowing the motive of the author, we need to understand the politics that are included in the book. So you need to question what are the politics, or these are the ideological agendas of a specific gay, lesbian, or queer works, and how are those politics revealed in the works thematically? Is it by content or by context, depending on the portrayals of its characters? It's a literary criticism. Of course, we also need to answer what are the poetics or the literary devices and the strategies of a specific lesbian, gay, or queer attributes that are present in the book that we are reading, or it can be a movie or anything. And then, since it is a literary criticism, we need to be very keen and to be able to read between the lines. We need to know how is queer, gay, or lesbian experiences coded in text. And then, of course, we need to identify what does the work contribute to our knowledge of queer, gay, or lesbian experiences and history, including literary history. The overall impression, last but not the least, we need to answer how does the literary text illustrate the problematic of sexuality and sexual identity, that is the ways in which human sexuality does not fall neatly into the separate categories defined by the words homosexual and heterosexual. The following are just a few masterpieces that can be critiqued using the queer theory. The first is a story between Achilles and Patroclus. According to some critics, the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus is a key element of the stories associated with the Trojan War. Its exact nature has been a subject of dispute in both the classical period and the modern times. In the Iliad, Homer described a deep and meaningful relationship between Achilles and Patroclus, where Achilles is tender toward Patroclus but callous and arrogant toward others. Homer never explicitly cast the two as lovers anyways. The next masterpiece is Sonnet 20 by William Shakespeare. Sonnet 20 has caused much debate, and some scholars believe that this is a clear admission of Shakespeare's homosexuality. The powerful emotions that the poet displays in Sonnet 20 are indicative of deep and sensual love. Many even believed that the poet's lover in the master-mistress of his passion has the grace and features of a woman, but devoid because of some arguments that Shakespeare is trying to picture a beautiful man. This strengthens the issue of homosexuality in the poem. As a whole, queer theories disagree about many things, but the one thing they do not disagree on is that if queer theory is to be understood as a way to test the established and stable categories of identity, then it would be powerful to be included or to be used in the field of literary criticism. That's all. Thank you for listening. God bless and goodbye.